I need to say Henning right in the front. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. I got into this project because I felt like I was reading the textbook to producers. And because they were always asking, and I think in the back of their mind, in the back of my mind, am I going to have a train wreck if I wrap this stuff? Is it? I've read about or heard about the producers that kill 26 heifers, and that story will live forever, right? We don't hear often about the good experiences. But I told Jeff Lemcooler, I said, we have got to find a way to be able to tell producers with assurance that this bale is safe to feed or it's good to feed. So what I went into this thinking, we just need to start testing hay and get a bunch of data on fermentation profiles, and that's just what we did. So what I want to present to you, and there's just a little bit of information in the proceedings, but I will unpack just a little bit more for this. But we've learned some very interesting things. And I would say that the photograph behind the title is from Fleming County, Mark Thomas, who you heard about in the hay contest. And this happens to be hay that was haylage, alfalfa grass haylage, cut after Thanksgiving, where it was cold. It was very cold. And so that data that from this cutting is in the data set I'm going to talk about. So the purpose was better define the quality of the alfalfa haylage that we raise, especially the volatile fatty acid profile, and that's VFA, and that's the lactic acid that we want, and some of the other things that we don't want. I wanted to understand what, if we could tease out what determines whether we've had good fermentation or not, and I think we've got some answers in this. And I want to develop confidence in saying that in the quality, the forage quality, that's pretty easy, and ideally the safety of haylage for feeding, and for livestock consumption. And we're using butyric acid as that marker for bad or possibly toxic silage, and butyric acid is a product of secondary fermentation from Clostridial or microorganisms, not the Clostridial stuff that's in the gut, but the Clostridial botulinum that causes us the animal problems. Okay, so that's what we were about. We started out to do. Now, just a reminder, good baleage is the book says, moisture content between 40 and 60% moisture content, between 40 and 65%, and you can read ranges that are a little more narrow, a little wider than that. Tightly baled, 4+ layers of plastic. 4 as the absolute minimum, and I loved that all of these experts are in the 6 to 8+ layers of plastic, and there's as I talked to them, there's an evolution in why they went on up, and they saw benefits going to higher levels, but 4 layers is the absolute minimum. Cut early. There's more water-soluble carbohydrates. It's the carbohydrates that ferment, that make the acid that we want. We want pH below 5 and lower if we can get it. That's difficult with forage crops. Lactic acid 3% or above, and very, very low levels of butyric acid. Now, we're going to repeat those numbers throughout, so you won't have to memorize those, but we do know what the parameters are. Yes, Steve? Early maturity. Yeah, you bet. Every one of the samples, almost every one of the samples that that are in this data set is cut early, or it's going to be much higher than the average for that type of forage. Good question. So when we say low pH and high lactic acid, what does that mean? And we've alluded to this already. Forage is going to be stable in storage. It'll have good life when we feed it, and we'll have a low probability of that Clostridial toxin. So what we did, we located and sampled a diverse set of bales and analyzed for moisture content, among other things, moisture content, nutritive value, and the VFA profile. And I do want to thank several county agents and Jeff Lemcooler, Corinne Belton from Shelby County, Levi Berg from Henry, April Wilhoit from Fleming, Tommy Yankee from Anderson, and Jeff Lemcooler for helping get access to these samples. and also for the KBN network support of the UK beef forage programs. They paid the bills. Okay, samples were taken in the counties I mentioned, and I had a producer in Bourbon County who had done a lot of this, and he volunteered to ask his feed company to go ahead and do the fermentation analysis on those. So we've got quite a broad spectrum of samples. The last 2 growing seasons, we got small grains, grasses, annuals, summer annuals, and legume grasses, 44 total samples. And the average moisture content was right in the middle, between 40 and 65. 60%, the average moisture content. The range was 22%, so we had some of that wrapped dry hay, and then up to 80% moisture, okay? Just almost fresh material. Just to show you what the fermentation report looks like, we use Dairy 1 to generate this. You're going to get a list of values like this, and I'm going to highlight the ones that we're looking at in particular on the next picture. Lactic acid, and this particular lot was from Henry County, almost a perfect fermentation on this one. We had, you would like to have more than 3% lactic acid. There were 3.8. Less than 1/10% butyric acid, there was none detected, and the pH was 4.5. So I will tell you that this is smoking good in terms of silage, okay, or baleage in particular. This is what they will also provide you at Dairy 1. Oh, sorry, yes, I missed. Yeah, so that's about right at moisture content of 60. So it's on the wet end of the 40 to 65 range if you take that as the best. Okay? All right. And they'll graph those results for you, and it shows the same thing a little in graphical ways. Now, they're good enough to publish the Pioneer. Yours are the black, the white is the gold, and the gray is the typical number, and those values are from Pioneer. All right, so you can see. Let's see if I got there. It is lactic acid right here. That's more than 3%. Butyric acid, way low, and then good pH, 4.5, which is really, really good. So quickly getting into what did we find? Well, I put all the samples in, and I just did an average and a minimum and a maximum for the 3 parameters I talked about. The protein averaged 15%, and since maybe 2/3 of this was grass-oriented material, a protein of 15%. Crude protein is way at the top of the range normally that we see. And some of these were summer annuals, and getting them at 10 and 12% or better is very high in terms of crude protein. There were some low crude protein values, and some of the alfalfa numbers were very high. You look at TDN, and the average was 56, a little bit low at 45 for the minimum, but up to 67. And many of those samples are going to be pushing the 60% TDN, which is going to get you in the range of doing a great job. It's a great job with stockers. And then on average, we had 100 relative feed value. And relative feed value is a calculation that takes into account a calculated energy or digestibility and a calculated intake. And it's a way to compare within classes of forage, okay? So grasses are always at a disadvantage to legumes just because of the way they're built. So I will take this apart and we'll look at the legumes separate than the grasses. But on average, having a relative feed value of 100 with this many grasses in it says we're at this is very good material. And the percent volatile fatty acids, or VFAs. Now you can see acetic, the less than 3%. Now we had some, the max between 2 and 3, so we're pushing that there, but everything on the acetic side was low. Propionic was everything was fine. But look at butyric. Well, then we can look at lactic first. I'll do that. On average, we're at 2 point something, 2.3 or 4, and they really would like you to have 3, okay? But more than 3. And so we did not quite get the fermentation in some samples. Now, I will say that we've got a set of samples from all throughout the growing season, some that are very dry, some that are taken in the wintertime when there's not many lactobacillus on the crop and not much chance for the temperature to help that chemical, those bugs to grow. So there's a lot of reasons why we've got maybe less than 3% on average lactic acid. But the one that concerns you, when you look at, they say we need to have less than 0.1%, and then we've got one that's more than 4% butyric acid, and we'll spend a little time looking at that particular one sample, because that's the one that you read about, right? The one where you've got a train wreck and somebody has to feed it or chooses to feed it or it gets fed, they didn't mean to. That one is the one we don't want. Okay. Now, if you'll just hang with me for a second, we got the forage type. The small grains on the first row, grass is next, summer annuals third, and then the legume. I lump the legumes and the legume grasses. You've got the number of samples that we had of each type, the moisture content, average moisture content for those. So if you just take a quick look here, because by the end of this, you'll know that we're going forward, we're going to worry more about moisture content if we really want to push the lactic acid numbers. The small grains had a lot, 70% moisture, and that's above, the book range of, say, 65% on the upper end, but we'll take a look at those. Grasses more at 50, and that happens because either they make a head in the spring or you're making them in the summertime when it's drier. It's harder to capture moisture. Summer annuals at 68%. Those stems that are hard to cure as hay, they hang on to moisture when in haylage too. And then the legume, a lot like the grass at 50-50. Now those numbers are encouraging. Those numbers are by and large right where you'd like to have them. Maybe, again, those might be a little high and you might worry about those, but that's what they are. Protein numbers are really solid and very high for the grasses, that if you were to look that up and compare that to anything that Kim was probably testing this year in grasses, those protein numbers are exceptional. And lactic acid really separates this out. And if you look at what worked, and we'll say work and didn't work, I'd say most everything worked. But lactic acid, small grains, great. And the summer annuals, great on average. The grasses, even though these are cut right, the numbers that would indicate that it ought to work, they just did not produce as much lactic acid as you would like. And the legumes did not either. And then legumes inherently have a disadvantage, and oddly enough, the protein that we like in forages is hard. It buffers against acidification. So it takes more, you got to degrade more energy to drop the pH with alfalfa because it's got 22% protein. The protein itself stops the pH from changing, okay? So the legume, it's harder to get low pH with legume crops. And you see a little bit lower lactic acid. Now I know that about 4 of those Fleming County samples were wintertime haylage. I mean, they were made October, November. And so that's really difficult to ensile, but I've sampled those myself, or almost all of them, and they all had good silage smell coming out. You're looking at TDN, those numbers are good, maybe a little bit low on the summer annuals. Relative feed values are strong. The pH numbers they reflect the lactic acid numbers quite closely, although the grass pH was 5.3, and that's still very respectable, but the small grains came out the best. And if you had to generalize, and this is lumping a lot of stuff together, small grains typically, if you're making baleage, you can cut them on time, and they will have more soluble carbohydrates or sugars or starch if they are in the green and early stages of maturity, okay? So, and there's the goal across the bottom for those parameters, okay? And this is the thing that whenever I was looking at these numbers and writing on the analyses and sending them back to producers, that it really struck me. And when you're looking at quality, you start off when you look at a sample and you say, how good is the energy content? Because the energy is what drives fermentation. And I would go through the sample, and it would be good in energy, and then boom, I'd get to pH, and I'd get to lactic acid, and it was just okay. And then as you do a lot of samples, this is what fell out. Moisture content is on the bottom, and then this is lactic acid. Total acidity, which is the next one, follows the same pattern. If you just try to say, okay, I want to get 3% lactic acid, then 60 to 70% moisture seem to be the sweet spot for this group of hay or haylage, even though there's a huge amount of variation. And down here on the dry end, when we get down to 40, we just didn't make much lactic acid at all. Now, we've already kind of established that a lot of haylage is made this way. So we've got anaerobic conditions for the most part. We're feeding it out in the wintertime, and this is good material and it works for us. But if we're trying to we want lactic acid, that's the end point, then we can afford to push towards the upper end of the moisture content. Same thing with this particular graph. Now I went ahead and put the R square, which is the correlation between those two, moisture content and total acid. An R square of 76% is a very strong relationship between moisture and lactic or total acidity in this case. Now I already said we were going to look at butyric acid as the marker, and here's the moisture in butyric acid, and you can see that once you push close to 80, you fall out of bed. And that one lone sample up here really fell out of bed. Now, if you go back and look at what leads to clostridial fermentation, it's going to be wet, yeah. It's also going to be probably torn plastic or air getting in there so that this butyric acid is pumped out, because that same sample had the highest amount of total acidity. So it's not like it wasn't trying to ferment, but something happened. Well, the wetness worked against it, but also probably a hole in the plastic. And I didn't see this sample in person. So, well, I didn't. I got back with the people involved, and I said, "Don't feed it." You know, I said, "This is a mess." You know, so I don't know, and I won't call out who I do know knows, but I'm assuming since I didn't get an angry phone call, maybe that we headed something off. The potential for it. It means the Clostridium was active, you know, and it chewed up sugars and made butyric acid. Okay, and a lot of times, if you read clostridial literature, you're going to find that comes from a lot of different things: soil, manure, dead animals that might get wrapped up in bales, and it happens. That's most oftentimes if you have a train wreck, when you're doing things right for the most part, it's something foreign got in that bale. All right, so let's finish up. Conclusions. Making Baleage makes good stuff, and you heard that from our great panelists. Dry Baleage didn't ensile well, but it fed well, okay? And the combination of protection from the rain, cutting early in particular, you got a better product. You're able to make that work and work well. The moisture content was the thing that drove the system, and we had more favorable results on the upper end of the moisture range. And at very high moisture Baleage did produce high butyric acid, but in only 1 out of 44 samples. Okay, so getting a fermentation profile costs you $25. Dairy One does them, and UPS, freight up there to the lab can give you confidence in your Baleage quality, and we can avoid potentially feeding toxic forage, or at least forage that's going to hurt our animal performance. They will eat it, but it certainly hurts production first and maybe worse. So, bingo. There you go. Yes, Caldwell. We waited a month. And only a month for that wintertime stuff too. And I can tell you, you better have good tape, because if it's really cold, it won't come off the doggone roll. I had to borrow some tarp tape. Didn't I, Tom? Steve. Well, Steve, that's and your comment was that the diagnostic lab has seen those kind of cattle, and I'm sure they have, and that people think it's common, and that's what I was trying to combat. How common is it with baleage? Do we run into things that are potentially a problem? Well, in this case, totally random stuff, 1 out of 44. And that's right. It's now there are about this many strains of it, and so it's a little wide open in terms of what strain you might get. But there was a question back here behind Caldwell. Yeah. You good? Yeah, John. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Right. I mean, rain on the ground with hay on the ground drives dirt up on top of it. Right. Well, and that's why I want the experience of knowing of getting the fermentation profile, so that if we wonder, let's just don't wonder, let's figure it out. Yeah, Tom. Yes. Hmm. Well, since we didn't try that, I don't know. But one of the things that I think we heard today is that the wraps not only exclude air, they keep something in the bale from poking its way out, and vice versa. So I think I'd stick with on the plus side on wrapping. Use more.